Have you ever walked into a room and noticed that one person, the one who barely speaks, yet somehow everyone notices them? They don't raise their voice. They don't chase attention. But when they look up, or when they finally say a word, the room goes quiet. Why are the most silent people often the most respected, and sometimes the most feared? It's not because they're cold. It's not because they're arrogant. It's because silence, when grounded in self-control, becomes a signal of something deeper. A kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself. A presence that commands, without ever demanding. I want to tell you the story of those who lead without shouting, influence without forcing, and intimidate. Not by aggression, but by calmness. The kind of people Stoic philosophers described over 2,000 years ago. Men and women who mastered their inner world, and because of that, couldn't be shaken by the outer one. In this video, we'll uncover the quiet strength that lies in stillness, and why, sometimes, silence is the loudest message of all. Welcome to the power of still presence, the Stoic path to silent respect. Let's be clear about one thing. There is a massive difference between being quiet out of fear and choosing silence out of strength. Stoicism teaches us that the most powerful person in the room is often the one who doesn't need to speak to prove anything. In fact, the Stoics believed that true authority comes from within. It doesn't rely on volume, dominance, or control. It comes from mastery of the self. When someone is silent, it doesn't mean they have nothing to say. It often means they're listening, processing, observing, calculating. They've learned something most people haven't. You don't have to react to everything. And in that control, there is power. You see, we live in a noisy world. People shout to be seen. They rant to feel important. Social media has trained us to speak before we think, to post before we reflect, to argue before we understand. But those who practice restraint, those who can remain composed while others lose their tempers, they stand out. Why? Because they possess what the Stoics called ataraxia, a deep inner calmness, untouched by chaos. Because when you no longer feel the need to prove yourself with words, your actions and your energy begin to speak volumes. Silence becomes your armor. Stillness becomes your presence. And people start to feel your discipline, even when you say nothing at all. There's another reason silence is so powerful. It creates space. Space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. That's a foundational Stoic teaching. You may not control what the world throws at you, but you can always control how you respond. And when you pause, when you choose silence instead of a knee-jerk reaction, that space becomes your power. In that space, you think clearly. You avoid foolish mistakes. You don't get dragged into drama. Instead, you become the calm in the storm, the eye of the hurricane. People start to notice. They start to admire your restraint, even if they don't understand it. Some will fear it, because they can't predict you. They can't manipulate you, and they can't shake you. That's why the silent are respected, and sometimes feared. They don't seek to dominate others. They've simply mastered themselves, and that mastery is louder than any speech ever could be. Let me tell you a story. It's not about a king or a famous general. It's about a quiet man who sat at the edge of every meeting, almost unnoticed, until the moment it truly mattered. His name was Mr. Adams. He worked for a major tech company in San Francisco. Not a flashy guy. He wore simple clothes, carried a notebook, rarely spoke. In a room full of extroverts pitching big ideas and fighting for attention, Adams was always still. He never interrupted. He never rushed to share his opinion. He just listened, watched, wrote things down. Some colleagues saw him as boring. Others thought he lacked ambition. But over time, a strange thing began to happen. In meetings where emotions ran high, where teams clashed and tempers flared, Adams remained calm, completely calm. No eye rolls, no sighs, no defense mechanism. And then, just when the debate reached a dead end, he would clear his throat. Everyone would turn to him, because they knew, when he spoke, it meant something. His insights were razor-sharp, his solutions simple and direct. He had been listening while others were shouting. Eventually, the CEO began to ask him directly, "What do you think, Mr. Adams?" His quiet presence began to shape decisions. People started seeking his opinion before meetings, not because he had a title, but because his wisdom was real. He didn't speak often, but when he did, it moved the room. And here's the twist. Adams wasn't trying to be powerful. He simply lived by one rule. Speak only when it improves the silence. That rule made him one of the most respected people in the company. Not because he demanded respect, but because his stillness commanded it. Now, you might say, that's just one story. So let's go back in time. Another example. This time from history. George Washington. Washington was not known for passionate speeches. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't charismatic in the way many leaders were. But those around him often described his presence as immense. He would sit silently in meetings, arms crossed, expression still. But when the time came to act, he did so with total conviction. He rarely got emotional, but his troops followed him with fierce loyalty. Why? Because he embodied steadiness. He didn't panic. He didn't scream. He made people feel secure, because he was secure within himself. And this pattern shows up over and over, even today. From CEOs to soldiers, from monks to master negotiators. The ones who cultivate silence become the ones people trust, follow, and fear losing. It's not about pretending to be silent. It's not about being mysterious for attention. It's about building such a deep inner foundation that you don't need to perform for the world. You simply are. And that energy speaks louder than words ever could. Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water. Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. This line, written nearly 2,000 years ago by the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, captures the heart of silent strength. Imagine a cliff facing an endless ocean. The wind howls. The water crashes again and again. But the cliff doesn't move. It doesn't scream. It doesn't fight back. It simply stands. Still, grounded, unshaken. That is what Marcus Aurelius is telling us to become. In a world where chaos is constant, where people throw opinions, insults, and challenges at you like crashing waves, you do not have to react to every splash. Silence, in this sense, is not weakness. It's composure. It's choosing to not be pulled into every emotional current. And that's what stoicism demands of us. Inner stillness in the face of outer storms. Marcus himself lived under constant pressure, leading armies, facing betrayal, enduring personal tragedy. Yet he wrote his meditations not as a show for the world, but as a reminder to himself, to hold his ground, to remain calm, to respond, not react. He could have ruled with fury, but instead, he ruled with restraint. That restraint didn't make him passive. It made him powerful. People respected him not because he shouted the loudest, but because he stayed calm when others lost control. Because his silence was never empty. It was intentional. That is the core of Stoic silence. Not absence, but essence. Not fear, but focus. Epictetus, another Stoic, once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." And that listening, that space between stimulus and response, is where real wisdom lives. When you're silent, not because you're unsure, but because you are sure, people sense it. They lean in. They trust that when you do speak, it's not noise. It's clarity. In fact, the most feared and respected individuals in history, across cultures, often share this one trait. They're not led by impulse. They're not controlled by anger. They're grounded, even when the world shakes. Like the cliff Marcus spoke of, you can let the waves crash. Let people rage. Let life throw what it will. But if you stand firm, still, and rooted in reason, you don't just survive the storm. You outlast it. And others will remember your calmness far longer than they remember anyone else's shouting. So what does all of this mean for you? In today's world, you're not an emperor like Marcus Aurelius. You're not standing on a battlefield. You're living in a fast, noisy, digital society where silence is rare and constant reaction is the norm. But maybe that's exactly why it matters more than ever. In today's meetings, whether at work or in school, people scramble to speak first, to sound smart, to dominate the space. But the one who listens deeply, waits patiently, and then offers something thoughtful, they're remembered. In relationships, silence helps you pause before reacting to a partner's words. Instead of defending your ego, you choose your response. That's power. On social media, everyone is shouting, posting, proving. But the person who doesn't take the bait? The one who doesn't need to respond to every criticism or show off every success. That's the one people start to respect, even admire, quietly. Here's the truth. The ability to be silent in a noisy world is a rare skill. It means you don't need approval to feel worthy. You don't need to argue to feel right. You don't need attention to feel alive. You become self-led, not reaction-led. You lead yourself first, and others naturally follow. The Stoics weren't trying to impress. They were trying to live in alignment with reason, virtue, and clarity. And they knew that silence was often the most honest expression of those things. So, in your daily life, try this. Let others talk. You observe. Let others react. You reflect. Let others rush. You remain rooted. And you'll find something incredible happens. Your words will carry more weight, because they are rare. Your presence will feel stronger, because it's not seeking validation. And your silence? It will echo louder than any noise. In a world that's louder than ever, maybe the bravest thing you can do is say less. Not out of fear, not because you have nothing to say, but because you've learned to value your presence more than your performance. You've learned that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And sometimes, it's earned not by the words you speak, but by the battles you choose not to fight. Think about the people you truly admire. The ones who walk into a room and shift the energy, without even trying. What makes them powerful? Is it their voice? Or is it the calm behind their eyes? The discipline in their posture? The stillness in their character? That kind of presence is built, quietly, consistently, and often in solitude. And you can start building it now. Start by pausing before you respond, by choosing clarity over noise, by letting your actions speak for you. Because silence isn't emptiness, it's focus. And that kind of focus is what separates the average from the exceptional. Brown square if this message spoke to something deep in you. If you're on a path to becoming not just heard, but truly respected, then this channel is for you. We share lessons from Stoicism, ancient wisdom, and modern strength every week. Blue Square, subscribe now if you haven't already. Not just to hear more words, but to be reminded of the ones worth living by. And remember, you don't need to shout to be powerful. You only need to be grounded. Until next time, stay silent, stay steady, and let your presence speak for itself.